out of Judges chapter 13, 14, 15, 16. We're going to be here a while. Y'all ready? Alrighty. Now, tonight's lesson is about Samson. Y'all know Samson, right? The big, strong guy with long hair. Um, it wasn't flowing locks like you would think, like Patrick Swayze in Point Break, or something like that, or even Mel Gibson in Braveheart. I think it was more like Stephen Baldwin from Encino Man. Y'all, you know, um, dreadlocks, because it says that his hair was in locks, so it was probably kind of nasty and matted, more like Bob Marley than Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. So y'all get the picture? Okay. Let's just say probably looks like anyone in the GA class tonight with long hair, as opposed to someone not in the GA class, because it's very humid outside. Anyway, so we're going to talk about Samson and his lovely matted hair. We know from the Bible that Samson was marked by God and appointed by God to be one of the judges or leaders of Israel during the time of the judges. His mom was barren. She was not able to have children, and it says in Judges chapter 13 that the angel of the Lord came and talked to his daddy. Now, his daddy was named Manoah, and when the angel of the Lord came to him, and he knew that it was God that they were talking to. He said, "You are going to have a son, and no razors to ever touch his head, because he is to be raised as a Nazarite. And his strength was going to be in his hair. He was supposed to be a devout man, and he was supposed to follow the ways of the Lord." He was taught that from the beginning, from the time he was in his mother's womb. He was dedicated to the Lord, and he was raised to be a dedicated man. It says in Judges 13:24, the woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson, and he grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir while he was in Mahana Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So while he was inside his mom, while he was a young boy, the Spirit of God was stirring inside of him, and he began to grow in strength. Now, y'all, this is a story that a lot of us remember from when we were kids. This is one of the old essentials that we were taught. A lot of the illustrated children's Bibles have pictures of Samson, fighting a lion, eating honey out of a lion carcass. These are some of the exploits of Samson. But he was also a sinner. He was a rough guy. He visited prostitutes. He murdered. He did a lot of things that you wouldn't consider the godly leader to be doing. And therefore, he, I don't know, I just don't feel like Samson was serving God the way he was supposed to. And when you get to thinking about the things that Samson did, he went down to this place and saw a Philistine woman. He was like, "Hey, Dad, there's this hot chick down there in Philistine. I would like to take her as my wife." And he was like, "Ain't there anybody nice looking right here in your own people right here? How about, you see all your cousins? How about one of them?" Because that's what they did back then. And he was like, "No, I want this Philistine. I want to have her as my wife." So he took her as his wife. But he didn't keep her as his wife. He went off and left her. And his daddy was like, "Well, somebody got to take care of her." So he gave her to, his brother and or a cousin or something like that. And Samson, he came back one day and he was like, "Yeah, I'd like to go see my wife." "Where's my wife at?" "Well, we done gave her to somebody else. You didn't want her. You left. So we just gave her to somebody else. He got all mad about it. Well, where is my wife at? I want her. So he went down there, and this is in Judges chapter 14. He went back to this lady. It says in verse 8, he went back to marry her, and he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, where he had killed the lion one day, and there was some honey in it, so he ate that. And he rejoined his parents, and he gave them some, and he didn't tell them where he got it. In verse 10, it says, now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. The people saw him, and they chose 30 men to be his companions. And Samson said, let me tell you a riddle. And y'all, this was just not necessary. It was not necessary, okay? He's like, let me tell you a riddle. And if you can figure out this riddle before this wedding feast is over, this was before he married the Philistine. Like, if you can figure out this riddle, I will give you 30 outfits. This is the weirdest bet ever, okay? This was before there was a such thing as a Roses or a Dollar General or even a Family Dollar, okay? 30 outfits. But if you can't figure it out, you got to give me 30 outfits, because apparently he needed a lot of clothes. And, he had 30 companions. Anyway, this was the bet, and this was the riddle. He said, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Ready, set, go. How are they going to know that he got some honey out of a lion? They wasn't going to know that. Y'all, this is the same exact kind of riddle that Bilbo Baggins told Gollum when he was in the tunnel, and he was like, what's in my pocket? He was like, how can I know that? You can't know that. So he's like, what's in the pockets, precious? And it was just a whole thing. If you ain't seen it, then you don't know. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't know. So anyway, for 3 days, they could not figure out the answer. They just could not figure out the answer. So on the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, they're like, talk your husband into telling us to answer this riddle. This is driving us crazy. Do this for us. Come on, woman. If you don't, we're going to burn you and your father's household down. So, tell us the answer. So then she threw herself on him. She's like, you hate me. You don't love me. You've given my people a riddle, and you haven't given us the answer. He's like, I ain't even told my mom and daddy what the answer of it is. So why should I explain it to you? And then she cried for 7 days. For 7 days she cried. Women, if you will cry for 7 days, your husband will tell you anything. They will lie to you. They'll tell you what. They'll be guessing, what do you want to hear? I'll tell you anything. I'll give you anything. We can go anywhere. Just please shut up. So that's where they were at. Okay? That's where they were at. And likewise, ladies, I'm sure if your husband cried for 7 days, you would probably do the same. All right? And they probably do. All it takes is a toothache. So before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, because she got the answer out, said, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And then he said, listen to this, y'all. He said, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Boy, there's a saying I need to remember. In other words, you got to my wife. You got the information out of my wife. So if any of y'all ever gossip with Alicia, I'm going to be like, if you ain't plowed with my heifer, then you wouldn't be gossiping. Right. Is that offensive? It's in the Bible, so it's all right. You sound like a 3rd grader saying hell. Preacher says it. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. That means that he did not do this with a simple spirit. This was indignation, righteous indignation. This was the anger of the Lord acting through Samson. He went down and killed 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. So burning with anger, he went back to his father's house. So they did get their clothes, but it was from their own guys. He just went and destroyed them. Then he was so mad, he said, I'm going to my wife's room, but his father wouldn't let him go in. He said, well, I was sure you hated her, so I gave her to your companion. That's who it was, one of his companions, not his cousin or brother. And so he was like, well, I was sure that you was still upset about the whole riddle thing. So I just gave her to one of your buddies, one of your companions. He was like, ain't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. This is a weird crew. Them Danites, man, you got to watch them. But anyway, Samson said to him, he's like, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. So he went out and did something that I didn't know you could do. He caught 300 foxes. Where did you get 300 foxes at? I don't think Noah could have got up 300 foxes. He didn't get but 2. But Samson got 300 of them. He went out there and 2 by 2 tied their tails together and then lit some fire. Y'all, this sounds like something that people used to do back in the old days. I'm talking about like to cats and stuff. So he tied their tails together, lit them on fire while they was harvesting all the wheat. So all the wheat was gathered, the sheaves was gathered, and there was all these stacks of hay out in the field. And he lit all them foxes on fire. And and that had to be tough. He didn't have no big lighter or nothing. So he's out there lighting foxtails on fire, and they're running everywhere because the tail's on fire, and they're tied to another fox. Can you imagine the chaos? That's how you're going to get even with somebody? This guy had some issues. So he burned up all the standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. He took out everything. They were fitting to have a famine because of this. So when the Philistines asked, who did this? Samson. They said, Samson did, because his wife was given to his companion. Well, they shouldn't have gave her away. But did his daddy do that? Wow. What was he taking it out on him for? So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. These folks they did not deal with anger very well, did they? And fire, they were like beavers. Anyway, he attacked them viciously, and he slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave. So he went to this cave in the rock of Edom, y'all. This was like a kind of like the Soto Cavern. It was like in the side of a hill, and it was rock. There he is in this cave. And I'm in chapter 15 of Judges right here. It says the Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. Lehi just means a hill, okay? And the people of Judah said, why have you come to fight us? These were the Israelites. And they said, we've come to take Samson prisoner, to do to him as he did to us. Well, what are they going to do? Take him prisoner and make foxes run all around him? Light his hair on fire or something? That would have done the trick in hindsight. But anyway. Then it says in verse 11 of Judges 15, then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Edom and said to Samson, don't you realize the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? He said, I did to them what they did to me. They said, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. And Samson said, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. And they said, agreed. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. And he was like, well, all right then. And they said, well, all right then. So they bound him up with 2 new ropes, and they led him up from the rock. And as they approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. They were like, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and the ropes on his arms became like charred flax, which apparently is something easy to break. I ain't never been tied up with charred flax, so I'm guessing it was easy. So he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, which apparently the jawbone of a donkey is a very hard item. And I know that because he used it as a weapon. And he killed, how many people did he kill? 1,000. Wow. Because he was thirsty after he did this, said he got so thirsty he cried out to the Lord, you've given me your servant this great victory? Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" And then God opened up that hollow place in Lehi, in that hill, and water came out of it, and he drank it, and he was revived. And it says that he led Israel for 20 years in the day of the Philistines. This was God's chosen man. So this, number one, should really help you to understand that preachers ain't perfect. Because this dude has some issues. All right? God chooses, see, how's the verse go? The foolish things to confound the wise. And God knew what Israel needed at that time. They needed somebody with physical strength, somebody that could act and not be overwhelmed. But Samson had a problem that plagued him for most of his life, and that problem was pride. Pride always comes before the fall. With nations, some of the rulers of the world, their pride is what brought down their entire empire or nation. It brings down houses. It destroys relationships. Y'all, pride is what got Satan kicked out of heaven. Pride is that thing that will creep up on us because it seems like it's part of our nature to crave it. Paul said that he don't take any pride in anything except for knowing Jesus. Knowing Christ is really the only thing that we have to be proud of. But Samson had a lot of pride. He thought that he was the baddest dude in the land. I just told you about a lot of his different exploits and the way that he had killed a lion with his own hands, killed 1,000 men with just a jawbone. He wasn't scared of anything. He could do almost anything. He was an extraordinary individual, but all of his power came from God. None of it was naturally his. He could not take ownership of the gifts that he had. And that makes me think that anything good that comes out of us has to come from God. Any type of intellect that we have, any type of ability that we have, any of those things has to be a gift from God because you could have been born without it. Samson could have been born a normal dude with short hair. He could have. But instead, he had that hair, and God said, as long as you have this hair, then you will be strong. And it was more or less just a symbol because I think that God would have, I know that God could have given him the strength at any given time. But it was about devotion. And to be raised and taught as a Nazirite in those days, it was almost like being kind of like taking a vow like a monk would. You know, it was a very sincere form of dedication. And that's what the people that were Nazirites were all about. Samson, it doesn't say in these 4 chapters of Judges about his relationship with God a whole lot. You know, as far as like recording him praying to God and different things like that. But it's very obvious that he did talk to God. Whenever he was in distress, he would cry out to God. And I don't know that since pride was one of his main problems, if he talked to God as much when everything was going fine. Because usually when you're dealing with pride, if everything is okay or if you're feeling all right, you don't need nobody else because you think you got it under control. Keyword being you, right? But his pride got him in some big trouble. In chapter 16, we see that Samson, it starts off, he went and saw a prostitute, and then he spent the night with her, and the people were trying to kill him. Says he lay there in the middle of the night, and then he got up, grabbed the doors of the city gate, ripped the doors off, and went and put them on a hill so that everybody could see. They're like, yeah, Samson's here. Y'all want some? Come get some. That's basically what Samson was saying. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman. This is in verse 4, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his power. And y'all know this story. She goes up to him and she's like, what's the secret of your power? And he lies. And then she goes about, he says, first of all, he says, if anybody ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll be as weak as any other guy. So the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him up with it. And he knew what she was going to do. She tied him up with them. And then when the guys, it says, with men hidden in the room, she called to him. She said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And then he snapped them. So they still didn't know what made him weak. Then Delilah said, you made a fool of me. You lied to me. Tell me, what's the secret? Look, if my wife tied me up, like she come up to me like, baby, you so strong. How do I get rid of your strength? First of all, like, why would you want to get rid of the strength? Well, after I would say thank you first, and then like, bless you. And then it'd be like, after she tied me up and did the thing that I said would get rid of the strength, I'm not going to tell her nothing else. I would, you ain't even going to be around me. But he thought that he was above anybody messing with him. In his mind, he was more powerful than he really was. He thought that he could just toy with fate and everything be fine. So the next time he told her another way to tie him up, and it didn't work. And then he did it again, and that didn't work. And in verse number 15, she said, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you made a fool out of me, and you hadn't told me the secret of your strength. In verse number 16, it says, with such nagging. See that word? Nagging. Don't even let me turn to Proverbs. Talk about nagging. Anyway. It says, with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So in verse 17 of Judges chapter 16, he told her everything. He said, no razor has ever touched my head, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I'll become as weak as any other man. So when Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word back to the Philistines. Now, you got to understand, it says when she saw that he had told her everything, she had to be wondering why he had these old matted up dreadlocks. And then it made sense. It's like, ding, ding, ding. That's why you got that nasty hair. Okay. I mean, he's the ruler of Judah. He's the ruler of the Israelites. What? Okay. So she went and told. And after he went to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to come in and shave off the 7 braids of his hair. So it began to subdue him, and his strength left him. And then she called out, she said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep, and he thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. If you don't know that God is away from you, then clearly you think more of yourself than you should. There is a severe problem. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And we have to acknowledge our weakness. We have to say, God, I can't, but you can. And only you can do it through me. When we start thinking that we can without God, that's where pride comes in. And pride is the thing that destroys us. Pride is saying, I can handle this situation. I will be all right. Well, according to this, it says, the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles, and they set him to grinding grain in the prison. It says, but the hair on his head where they had shaved it began to grow. They didn't even consider to keep it shaved. But they had him. They poked his eyes out. It says in verse 23, the rulers of the Philistine assembled this great sacrifice to Dagon, their god. And they were celebrating, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised Dagon, their god, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. So they were all full of pride. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So here's this guy with his eyes gouged out, in shackles, weak, and they want him to come and dance around. Entertain us. I don't know what kind of entertainment he did. I don't know what kind of talents he had. I don't know if he could play a oboe or if he did card tricks. I don't know what he did. Probably not sleight of hand since they were tied up. He might have danced a little bit. I don't know. He might have been good at dancing. But anyway, he was brought out to entertain them. It says, when they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, he said, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple so that I can lean up against them. And that seemed like a reasonable request for somebody that was tired. Somebody that had been having to dance around with chains on for a while. So the guy put his hands on the two pillars that were there holding up the temple, and he was able to rest a little bit. But at this point, through suffering and shame and humiliation, Samson's pride had left him. He was not prideful anymore. And God knows, as well as we do, that sometimes it takes breaking our heart before pride can break out. Sometimes it takes us being humiliated and embarrassed, or making a fool of ourselves, or getting in such a predicament that we have no other choice than to admit that we can't get out of it. That's when we call on God. And that's exactly what Samson was about to do. It says the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of Philistine were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Verse 28 says, then Samson prayed to the Lord, and he said, sovereign God, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my two eyes. Then Samson reached toward the two central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them with his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. He did not consider his life worth living anymore, only being used by God to defeat the enemy. He knew, he had to know, his whole point of being there, coming from a barren mother, God had to be the reason why he was there, and the purpose for his life was to be one of the judges in Israel's history. The strength all came from God, and it was there to defeat Israel's enemies. God powered him. And this last time he's like, use me for your purpose. Use me to get revenge on these people that have done this and have brought shame to your name. He did his part, but now he was ready to pay for it. Said then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. So he killed many more when he died than he did when he lived. It was only by his death did he finally defeat the Philistines. If you had to take a lesson out of that, it may be that the greatest victory cost the most. I think that it would cost us less if we would get rid of our pride and not make our kind, loving God take it away for us. Pride, we know, is a sin. Pride is that thing that says, I can do it without God. So if we think that we can do it without God, That's a very, very naive and dangerous thing to say. God is a jealous God. He did not give His Son on the cross to forgive our sins so that we can just live in sin and think that everything will be okay. He wants us to live out of sin. He wants us to live a life appreciating what He's done for us and recognizing that every bit of strength, talent, time, anything good came from Him. Don't you see? Don't you see what God's given us? Do you feel what God's given you? I think all that God wants from us is simply to say, thank you. I really appreciate what you've done for me. I thank you for what you've given to me. And I realize that I don't deserve any of it. You could take it away. I'm not going to live in fear, though. I'm just going to live in love, in a relationship with my God. And no matter what comes my way, I know that my God is going to do what's best for me. Even though, like Job said, even though I may lose my life, I will yet serve my Lord. So the opposite of pride would be humility. And in Philippians chapter 2, we are taught to imitate Christ's humility. So the humility of Jesus is something we're supposed to try to live like. It says He emptied Himself of His glory, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be concerned about. He emptied Himself and became human so that He could be a sacrifice for all humans. And He died for our sins. So that type of sacrifice is the type of humility that we're supposed to have. So what can I give? Well, let's make it easy, all right? I want you to get this tattooed on your brain, all right? Not literally, but if you want to, that's cool. Make somebody smile today. All right? Let's just start there. Make somebody smile today. Write it on a piece of paper. Put it on your dash. Put it on your bathroom mirror. So that way in the morning when you're up popping pimples, you can look at it and read it. Put it on your coffee pot. If you visit that thing at least once a day. Make somebody smile today. And if you would start there, that is a form of humility. That is a way to spread the joy of the Lord. Because how are you going to make somebody smile? You're just going to tell them a joke? You're going to spread cheer. You're going to make them happy. Make somebody smile today. Normally, you can easily make somebody smile if you do something for them. Kind word. Tell them a joke. Any of that's fine. We went through the Burger King drive-thru a couple of weeks ago. There was a lady taking the money, because that's always at the first window. And she was sitting down, and it was like, she was sitting on, I don't know, maybe like a tablet. It wasn't much. She was way down there. I said, ma'am, you could tell she was exhausted. Ma'am, are you sitting down or are you that short? She said, I'm sitting down. I said, good, because that'd be awkward if you were standing up. And it would have been, because she would have been very short. But she said she had been there for 11 hours, and she still had another hour to go. But she smiled, and that might have given her some energy. Like, let's see how many other people think I'm this short. What can you do to make somebody smile? For Samson, it was bringing the house down. Ironically, that's also what comedians say when they have a good set. Bringing down the house. And He literally did. I don't know if they were laughing. Maybe he was telling jokes. Maybe that's what his entertainment was. He was down there sitting there, it's like, hey, hey guys, what do you call a camel with no legs? It don't matter, he won't come anyway. I don't know. All right, any questions? All right, thank y'all for attending.